Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. Mud tasted like iron and humiliation, filling Julian's mouth as he face-planted into the slush for the third time in 10 minutes. "Get up, Cadet Vane!" A voice thundered from above, deep and reverberating like a war drum. "The enemy will not wait for you to catch your breath, and neither will I." Julian clawed his fingers into the freezing, rain-slicked earth of the obstruction course, his lungs burning as if he'd inhaled broken glass. Above him, silhouetted against the grayscale sky of the torrential downpour, stood Commander Silas Thorne. The man was a monolith of black tactical gear and uncompromising brutality, his silver eyes glowing with predatory disdain under the brim of his cap. He didn't look like a man. He looked like a weapon forged in the dark. Julian spat a mouthful of grit to the side, his beautiful, usually immaculate features twisted in a snarl of pure hatred. 50 laps. The bastard had ordered 50 laps in full gear because Julian had smirked during roll call. It was a death sentence disguised as discipline. "I said get up," Silas commanded, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating through the wet ground right into Julian's shivering ribs. "Or ring the bell and quit. Go back to your father's mansion and play dress-up." That was the spark. The mention of his father, the disappointed general who viewed Julian as a stain on the family lineage, ignited a fire in Julian's solar plexus that burned hotter than his exhaustion. Julian forced his trembling legs to straighten. He rose, swaying like a sapling in a hurricane, wiping the mud from his eyes to glare at the instructor. "I'm not ringing any damn bell," Julian rasped, the words tearing his throat. Silas stepped closer, invading Julian's personal space until the scent of rain, gun oil, and heavy, masculine musk overwhelmed Julian's senses. The commander tilted his head, a ghost of a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Then run, pretty boy. Run until you break." As Julian launched himself back into the deluge, legs screaming in protest, the hatred crystallized into something colder, sharper. He didn't just want to survive Silas Thorne. He wanted to destroy him. But Julian Vane wasn't a soldier. He was a socialite conscripted against his will. He couldn't beat Thorne in a fight, and he couldn't outrun him on the track. But everyone had a weakness. Even an iron wall had a gate. Julian looked back over his shoulder, watching the rain plaster Silas's uniform to his broad, muscular frame. He saw the way the other recruits looked at Thorne with terror, but he also saw the way the female officers, and half the men, looked at him with hidden hunger. "I'm going to make you fall in love with me," Julian vowed, the thought keeping his rhythm as his boots slammed into the mud. "I will make you obsessed. I will make you need me more than you need your discipline or your rank. And the moment you beg for me, I'm going to laugh in your face and leave you broken." The showers in the barracks were communal, steam-filled chambers of tiling and echoing male banter. Julian stood under the scalding spray, watching the grime of the obstacle course swirl down the drain. His body was a map of bruises, his pale skin marred by the harsh training, but underneath the lean muscle was hardening. "He's trying to kill you, you know," Cale, the recruit in the adjacent stall, muttered. 50 laps is against regulation for a first offense. You should report him." "Report the hero of the Northern Front?" Julian scoffed, pushing wet strands of platinum blonde hair back from his forehead. "They'd laugh me out of the office." "No, Cale. I have a better plan." Cale peered around the divider, eyes wide. "You look like you're plotting murder. Please tell me you aren't going to sabotage his gear." "Much more subtle," Julian murmured, shutting off the water. He stepped out, wrapping a towel low around his hips. He caught his reflection in the foggy mirror, slender, elegant, with eyes the color of amethyst that had charmed dukes and politicians alike back in the capital. "I'm going to seduce him," Cale choked on air. "Thorne? The man is a cyborg. He doesn't have feelings, Julian. He has mission parameters." "He's a man," Julian said, drying his neck with slow, deliberate strokes. "And there isn't a man alive I can't break." The opportunity to initiate the game came 2 days later during the uniform inspection. The barracks were silent, the air thick with tension. Silas Thorne walked down the line of recruits, his boots making a heavy thud-thud-thud on the polished concrete. He stopped in front of Julian. Julian held his breath, staring straight ahead, his posture perfect. Silas circled him slowly. The commander carried a riding crop, tapping it rhythmically against his own thigh. He stopped behind Julian, his presence a towering heat source against Julian's back. "Your belt is crooked, cadet," Silas whispered, his voice a low rumble near Julian's ear. Julian didn't flinch. "Permission to adjust, sir?" "Denied." Silas moved to the front. He reached out, his gloved fingers brushing against Julian's waist. The touch was clinical yet electric. As Silas adjusted the buckle, Julian did the unthinkable. He shifted his weight, just a fraction, leaning into the commander's touch. He looked up through his lashes, softening his gaze from defiant to submissive, letting his lips part slightly. "Thank you, Commander," Julian breathed, his voice dropping to a husky register meant for bedrooms, not barracks. Silas froze. His hand lingered on the belt buckle for a microsecond longer than necessary. His steel-gray eyes snapped up to meet Julian's violet ones. For a heartbeat, the air between them crackled. Silas's pupils dilated, a physiological betrayal. "Don't get comfortable, Vane," Silas said, his voice rougher than before. He pulled his hand away as if burned. "5 demerits for the uniform. Cleaning duty in the armory tonight. Alone." Julian kept his face neutral, but internally he was cheering. "Got you." Cleaning duty alone meant isolation. Isolation meant opportunity. The armory was a cavernous room filled with the metallic scent of high-grade weaponry. Julian was polishing the barrel of a sniper rifle when the heavy steel door creaked open. It was past midnight. Silas walked in, stripped of his tactical vest, wearing only a black undershirt that clung to his chest and arms, revealing a tapestry of scars that spoke of a violent history. He carried a clipboard, looking surprised to see Julian still there. "You should be done by now," Silas stated, walking over to the rack of assault rifles. "I wanted to be thorough, sir," Julian said. He was sitting on a workbench, legs dangling. He had unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of his fatigue jacket, exposing the hollow of his throat and a hint of collarbone. Silas didn't look. He began checking inventory, his back to Julian. "Thoroughness is rare for someone of your background. Usually, you types pay someone else to be thorough for you." "You seem to know a lot about my type," Julian countered, hopping off the bench. He moved silently, approaching Silas from behind. "Have I offended you personally, Commander? Or do you just hate anyone who didn't grow up in a trench?" Silas turned, and suddenly they were inches apart. The size difference was staggering. Silas dwarfed him, a mountain of hardened soldier against a willow of a boy. "I don't hate you, cadet," Silas said, his gaze dropping to Julian's exposed collarbone before snapping back up. "I hate wasted potential. You have the reflexes of a viper and the intellect of a strategist, yet you act like a spoiled brat. I push you because you are the only one worth breaking to rebuild." The admission stunned Julian. It wasn't the answer he expected. He thought he was just a target for class resentment. This was attention. Julian stepped closer, invading the danger zone. He reached out, his fingers bold, and picked a piece of imaginary lint off Silas's shoulder. "Maybe I don't want to be rebuilt, Silas," he whispered, dropping the honorific. "Maybe I just want to be handled." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Silas caught Julian's wrist. His grip was iron-tight, possessive. He didn't push Julian away. He pulled him in, just an inch until their chests brushed. "You are playing a dangerous game, boy," Silas growled, his eyes darkening to the color of storm clouds. "Do you think I don't see it? The looks? The shifting? You think you can charm your way out of duty? Is it working?" Julian challenged, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was the thrill he wanted. The precipice. Silas stared at him, the conflict warring behind his eyes. Duty versus desire. Slowly, deliberately, Silas released Julian's wrist and stepped back, rebuilding the wall between them. Finish the rifles. If there is a single smudge, you're running until you vomit. Silas turned and marched out, but Julian saw it. The clenched fists, the tension in the commander's shoulders. He had affected him. The iron wall was cracking. Weeks passed and the dynamic shifted. The brutality of the training didn't lessen, but the cruelty vanished. When Silas corrected Julian's stance during hand-to-hand combat, his hands lingered on Julian's hips and shoulders. When they made eye contact across the mess hall, the air grew thick. Julian continued his assault. He left subtle notes in his mission reports that could be read as flirtatious. He excelled in training just to see the flash of pride in Silas's eyes. But somewhere along the line, the game began to glitch. Julian found himself watching Silas not to calculate a weakness, but to admire the man. He found himself seeking Silas's approval not for the plan, but because he craved the praise. Then came the Black Forest survival exercise. It was a 3-day simulation in the dense, freezing woodlands bordering the academy. No food, live rounds, hostile drones hunting them. Julian was separated from his squad on the second night. A sudden landslide, triggered by the torrential rains, swept him down a ravine. He woke up in agony. His left leg was trapped under a fallen log, and the water level was rising. The cold was a physical weight pressing the life out of him. He tapped his comms. Static. Command. This is vain. He wheezed, teeth chattering violently. Leg broken. Grid 4. Taking on water. No answer. The darkness closed in. Julian laid his head back against the mud. The irony of dying alone in the rain not lost on him. At least Silas won't have the satisfaction of failing me, he thought bitterly. Time blurred. The cold stopped hurting and started feeling like a warm blanket, a sign of terminal hypothermia. He closed his eyes. Suddenly, light exploded in his vision. A flare. Then the splashing of heavy boots. Julian! The voice was raw, panicked. Not the voice of a commander. Strong hands were on him. The log was heaved up with a roar of exertion that sounded inhuman. Julian gasped as the pressure released, agony shooting up his leg. He was scooped up into arms that felt like steel bands. Stay with me, Silas commanded, his face hovering above Julian's, illuminated by the dying flare. The stoic mask was gone, shattered. In its place was sheer, unadulterated terror. Eyes on me, Vane. That's an order. Silas, Julian mumbled, his head lolling against the commander's chest. You came. I tracked your beacon. Everyone else said it was a glitch. Silas gritted out, trudging through the rising water. I didn't listen. He carried Julian 2 miles to a small hunting cabin outside the perimeter. He kicked the door open and laid Julian on the dusty floorboards. The room was freezing. Silas didn't hesitate. He stripped Julian of his wet gear with efficient, trembling hands, checking the leg. It's a fracture, not a break. You're lucky, Silas murmured. He stripped off his own soaked jacket and thermal shirt. We need to get your body heat up. Now. There was no wood for a fire. There was only body heat. This was the skinship trope Julian had read about in novels, but the reality was far more intense. Silas pulled Julian against him, skin to skin, wrapping them both in a dry survival blanket from his pack. The heat radiating from Silas was intoxicating. Julian buried his face in the crook of Silas's neck, shivering uncontrollably. Silas rubbed Julian's back, his large hands creating friction, warming him. Why? Julian whispered into the dark. Why come yourself? You could have sent a drone. Silas was silent for a long time. His hand moved up to tangle in Julian's hair, holding him close. Because if you died, Silas whispered, his voice cracking, I would burn this entire forest down. The confession hung in the air. The game was over. Julian looked up, finding Silas's eyes in the gloom. The barriers were gone. Silas, Julian breathed. He closed the gap. This time Silas didn't pull away. He met Julian with a hunger that had been starving for months. The kiss was rough, tasting of rain and desperation. It wasn't the kiss of a seducer and a target. It was two crashing waves. Julian felt Silas's dominance, his power, but he also felt his worship. For that night, in the dark cabin, Julian forgot the plan. He forgot the revenge. He only knew the feeling of being held by the only man who had ever seen his true strength. The return to the academy was a blur of medical bays and debriefings. Julian's leg was casted. Silas returned to duty, but everything had changed. They stole moments in the archives, behind the tactical sheds. Stolen kisses, whispered promises. Julian was falling. He was falling hard. He decided he had to end the plan. He had to tell Cale the bet was off, that he was serious. But fate, as it often does in forbidden romances, struck first. 2 weeks after the incident, Julian was limping toward the barracks when he heard voices around the corner. It was Cale and a group of other recruits. "Vane's actually doing it," Cale was laughing. "I saw them in the comms room. The commander is wrapped around his finger." "No way," another recruit scoffed. "Thorn? He's unshakable." "Julian said he'd make the bastard beg," Cale continued, his voice echoing in the hallway. "He said he'd charm him, make him fall in love, and then dump him publicly just to prove he could. It's the ultimate revenge for those 50 laps." Julian's blood ran cold. He stepped forward to shut Cale up, but he froze. Standing at the other end of the hallway, holding a stack of files, was Silas. The commander's face was unreadable, but his eyes, the light in them had died. It was as if the Black Forest had never happened. The warmth was replaced by a glacial void. He looked at Julian, then at the laughing recruits. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. He simply turned and walked away. The silence of his departure was louder than a gunshot. "Silas!" Julian cried out, ignoring the pain in his leg as he scrambled after him. He caught up to him in the commander's office. Silas was standing by the window, staring out at the parade grounds. "It's not true," Julian gasped, closing the door. "I mean, it was true at the start. But Silas, please, you have to listen." Silas turned. His expression was terrifyingly calm. "Dismissed, Cadet Vane." "No!" Julian stepped forward. "I fell in love with you. Yes, I started it as a game because I hated you, but—" "A game," Silas repeated, the words sounding like a curse. He walked over to his desk and dropped the files. "I broke protocol for a game. I risked my career for a game." He looked at Julian, and the pain in his eyes was so raw it made Julian flinch. "I thought, for the first time in 10 years, that someone saw me. Not the rank. Not the legend. Just me. I do see you," Julian pleaded, tears stinging his eyes. "You see a target," Silas said coldly. "Get out of my office. Transfer papers will be on your bunk by morning. I'm sending you to the logistics division. You'll be safe there, and far away from me." "I won't go," Julian said, his voice trembling. "You have no choice. I am your superior officer," Silas snarled, slamming his hand on the desk. "And I am ordering you to leave." Julian fled. Not because he was scared, but because he saw the crack in the iron wall widening, and he knew he was the sledgehammer that had done it. The transfer orders were processed within 24 hours. Julian was packing his bags, his heart a hollow cavity in his chest. He had won the game. He had made Silas feel, and he had destroyed him. Tasted nothing like victory. It tasted like ash. Suddenly, the base sirens began to wail. Code red. "All hands to defensive positions," the intercom screamed. "Insurgent breach in Sector 7. This is not a drill." Sector 7. That was the command center. That was where Silas was. Julian dropped his bag. He grabbed his rifle from the locker. "Vane, you're on medical leave," Cale shouted. "Go to hell," Julian spat. He sprinted out of the barracks, his cast thumping heavily on the concrete. The command center was under siege. Smoke billowed from the windows. The insurgents had bypassed the perimeter sensors. Gunfire erupted in staccato bursts. Julian didn't think. He moved. He knew the layout of the building better than the enemy. He had cleaned every inch of it. He flanked the entrance, climbing a trellis to the second-floor window. Inside it was chaos. Bodies of guards lay in the hall. He heard shouting from the main strategy room. Julian kicked the door open. 3 insurgents had Silas cornered behind an overturned table. Silas was bleeding from a head wound, his ammo dry, wielding a combat knife with lethal desperation. "Drop the weapon, Commander!" one insurgent yelled, raising an assault rifle. Silas snarled, ready to charge and die fighting. Julian didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle, exhaling slowly, just as Silas had taught him. Breath. Squeeze. Don't pull. Bang. 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 3 shots. 3 bodies hit the floor. Silas looked up, shock registering through the blood masking his face. Julian stood in the doorway, lowering the smoking rifle, his chest heaving. "I told you," Julian panted, limping into the room. "I'm not going to logistics." More shouting from the hallway. Reinforcements were coming. The danger had passed. Silas dropped the knife. He stared at Julian. Really stared at him, seeing the terror and the absolute resolve in the boy's eyes. Julian had come back into the fire for him. "You could have been killed," Silas said, his voice trembling. "If you died," Julian repeated Silas's words from the forest, tears finally spilling over. "I would burn this entire base down." Silas crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't care about the regulations. He didn't care about the cameras or the approaching squad. He grabbed Julian's face with bloodied hands and kissed him. A kiss of forgiveness, of claiming, of absolute surrender. "The transfer is cancelled," Silas murmured against Julian's lips as the MPs stormed the room. "I'm sentencing you to life. With me." Julian laughed, a broken, happy sound, burying his face in Silas's neck. "Copy that, Commander." And that is how the recruit tamed the iron wall. If you enjoyed seeing Julian risk it all to save the man he swore to destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a lover who started a relationship just to get revenge? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.